One.
Hello and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Allison and I will be your host. And with me is Brian, who does all of the things in the background. So give him a big thank you. Very much appreciated. And it was indeed my fault that it's starting a little late. I had numerous questions that Brian was fielding. So thank you to Brian very much for helping us out with that. All right. Well, just me. Like, not you guys. Just me. No royalty here. All right. So this is Red Chill Cinema, and we are going to be covering Hollywood's how Hollywood fails strong female characters. In particular, Game of Thrones. I was about to say House of Dragons, but that's not correct. Game of Thrones. This is very, very own Dragon Hitler, Daenerys Targaryen. And there we go. So we're going to have a discussion of Daenerys Targaryen. I figured it was time to do another Red Chill, just enjoy chatting about media, as opposed to going right into the deep end of the dark cesspool that is modern culture.
Yeah.
I'm really curious what just as an aside, I'm really curious what the next group of people that we're going to have to advocate for, like the next stigmatized group of people, because we're sort of running out of ones that are sympathetic. You know what I mean? I mean, trans people are sympathetic, gay people are sympathetic, black people, minorities.
Oh, you mean the next purse puppy?
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, like we really are running out of sympathetic people.
Yeah,
Maybe
I think that's
female villains.
Yeah. Well, why not? It's female evil. It is totally. I don't know if you saw, but like there was this I don't know, it's like a little viral video about this new show, The Acolyte, and the people involved, Leslie Headlands, people like that, were being asked like whether they, by the interviewer in these sort of softball interviews that are just puff pieces to promote the show, like they were like light side or dark side, and they were like dark side, like all of them, and they were also saying, well, like they're both, it's like two sides of the same coin, this kind of duality thing. And it was sort of showing that while also showing these older videos of George Lucas explaining that, like what, like these things are essentially the story of good and evil, and and virtue and vice, essentially. So yeah, contrast that. But I mean, anyway, this isn't about Star Wars. I don't mean to derail.
But it is about female villains, right? And
yes, that's ultimately what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Constant attempt to like rehabilitate them or frame them as not being villains, because of course holding women to any kind of standard is misogyny. Which is why we can even consider an ancient genocidal tyrant like Jezebel to be an unfairly maligned victim.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's I mean, I guess that is the last thing. It's basically just like the last first puppy is for a female evil not existing. Like basically just like, oh well, that's just it. Do you know her backstory? Do you know the lore? that makes it all okay. So anyway,
well, if men just said yes, all the time, then women wouldn't be villains, right?
Yep.
Because women, female villains don't actually aggress against other women. That never happens. Okay. All right. So before we begin, I want to remind everyone, if you want to send us a message, you can do so at feedthebadger.com/justthetip. That is the very best way for you to send us funds. And it's the very best way for you to send a comment, because you get to avoid YouTube's comment enhancement system, or whatever they want to term it. And we get the full benefit of whatever funds that you send us. So feedthebadger.com/justthetip to send us comments. And if you want to support the show at any time while we're streaming, go to feedthebadger.com/support. And after we're streaming too. I don't want to restrict you to just, supporting us during the stream. That would be ridiculous. So feedthebadger.com/justthetip to send us a tip, and feedthebadger.com/support to support the show. Okay, I guess we'll just start. Like, just get right into it.
So have you seen any of this video?
I'm aware of the Daenerys apologia. I mean, honestly, I don't mind her as a villain. I think that, well, she could have had a much better villainous arc if they had taken a little bit more time with it. I saw the villainous substrate, the villainous basic materials were already there for Daenerys. Like it was always obvious that she was going to go that route, in my opinion. Even in the book, like I read the first chapter with her, and I'm like, is Martin presenting this woman as somebody who's going to go seriously south? Because I'm getting that vibe from her. So I feel like her villainous arc was actually foreshadowed. It was one of the few things that I felt was relatively foreshadowed well. I think people were just making excuses for her because, she's a cute girl.
Well, I don't know about that. I think that there is, I don't know, it's like the female power fantasy. That Coltane or Teal has talked about. It's like, I don't want to butcher it, but it's sort of like a woman doing something, really dishonest, manipulative, and getting away with it is like the power fantasy. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, I know it is. It's like the male power fantasy is more physical and the female one is more social. But I think that they're women.
The male power fantasy is being able to save someone who needs them, right?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Or alternatively, if you want to go with the feminist informed male power fantasy, it's being able to have sex with consensual sex with whomever you want, and drive a really fast car, or whatever Gilgamesh had before his pre-Enkidu character arc. But honestly, from what I've seen, most men just want to be able to protect their loved ones. That's their power fantasy. Yeah. That's why they are drawn to superheroes, and why superheroes they always have this character arc in which they learn to set aside their own selfish interests and don't use their power for that. They use their power for the greater good. It's just I don't know if they're accurate, but it's gross. Like, I'm not going to say that Coltrane or the MGTOW creators are wrong when they say that's the female power fantasy. Certainly there's a lot of apologia for female female villains in these stories and among the fan base. So I can't say that's not true. It's disappointing if it is.
Yeah.
And honestly, if you're a woman who's like, oh, that's not true, I'm not, like, just don't be like that. Like, honestly, the only way that you can disprove this is to live up to being better than that. And I guess, there is like maybe we could say that men also have a sort of a fantasy about being the villain. What do you think? Like, because sometimes it's fun to just be like my annoying boss. I could just blow their head off, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there is a desire to get revenge, but I think that I don't think that's like I don't see it as a power fantasy, because I think that it's not like the default setting for men. But again, I think the main difference is that I think the main distinction is that when men, the reason why men are encouraged to pursue virtue is because there is a framework that they have to operate within that is supposed to reward that, but also there is a strong incentive to pursue it. And I think that women don't have the same incentive. I think that they're just forgiven for everything. And so, like, they have to almost invent things. It's not that females don't have virtue. It's that we don't expect it from them. We don't ask it of them.
And this is something that really aggravates me, especially when I see the apologia for female villains, but also female criminals. Like, why would I want to look at a woman who has done something horrific, like, for example, stabbing her partner to death or stabbing her children to death, and listen to people give excuses why she shouldn't be punished? Why should society treat her better? Like, why should I enjoy watching a woman who is villainous or lacks virtue not be treated, not be punished as a woman? Like, why should I enjoy that? Like, because the thing is that it makes being virtuous, controlling your temper, being a person who tries to live up to principles, meaninless. I mean, ultimately it doesn't, because you have to give yourself your own meaning, but it is still sort of, it's irritating because like I said, well, like I didn't say, what I'm trying to say is when you treat virtuous women in the same way as you treat villainous women, there's no point in being virtuous. I mean, there is, because it's got its inherent benefits, but it's like, it's a slap in the face, right? And you're basically saying that the only salient factor that a woman has is being a woman. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
Just her womanhood. That's the only thing that matters about her. Like, not her choices, not her decisions, not her actions, not how she affects others, just being a woman. And I can't imagine anything more frustrating and pointless.
Yeah.
Not to mention, like, your value just as a woman, by definition, is something that you have not too much effect over. I guess you can use makeup and cosmetics and plastic surgery to change some aspect of it. But we're all heading towards the grave, right? We're all heading towards old age. What value do you have then? So what you're given, the value you're given, only ever depreciates, and you want to invest in that?
Yeah. All right, well, let's get to the video. So this is called How Hollywood Failed Daenerys. So I'll just see what they say.
Yep. Oh, I hate this stupid invented language.
It sounds Italian, like.
Yeah.
I don't know. They're trying to, yeah. It sounds a little Italianish. I don't know. Valerio Munuengos Nuhis Isa.
Novagedi. Axiosentas, mentiosentas. Kiloni pilos luevale dolviosenetas. Inini otricatas. Urnelue dolide prisotas.
Yeah, this is so if you don't know what's going on, Daenerys pretty much declared war on slavery.
On
like
slavers, you mean?
Like the British Empire.
Yeah.
Except, the British Empire didn't commit many atrocities in pursuit of ending slavery as she did. So, like, yeah, okay. So that's because she has this sort of idealist idea of a world without slavery. I'm not like, one of the things that they could have really established is why she's so obsessed with ending slavery, because I do not recall why.
Wasn't she kind of like, didn't she live as a slave for a little while or something?
No, not before she became obsessed with ending slavery. She was just basically paired off with this, I guess, universe's version of a stereotype about the Mongols, in order for her brother to gain an army to get his throne back, essentially. So she was never really a slave. And if she was, she certainly was treated significantly better than slaves in general. So
yeah,
I don't think she was a slave, but she was very obsessed with ending slavery. And she did various things in the pursuit of that are a little questionable, shall we say. But ultimately, if you think about it, and I've watched the full arc, in the end, she basically freed the slaves so they could all be her slave. So she could essentially treat the world like her dollhouse and construct it in whatever image that she felt she wanted. And basically an image of adoration of her. And the way that I interpret the final scenes is that in the end, she was presented with a dilemma that meant that she wasn't the one people would turn to for salvation. And because she wasn't, she just burnt everything to the ground. So, like, yeah, sure, she's trying to end slavery. Or if you look at it from another point of view, she just wants all the slaves to herself.
Yeah.
And she wants the masters to be slaves too. So, yeah, I mean, there you go. But let's find out what this individual, this extended intro is a little annoying, but let's keep going.
Joe, I can skip past it if you want. We'll see.
Well,
it looks like it goes for a little while longer. Okay.
not too long.
What? Yeah, it's only a little bit.
It's not too long. The tragedy of Daenerys Targaryen.
In 2011, George R.R. Martin did an interview with the New York Times Magazine. In this interview, Martin expresses his misgivings about Hollywood adaptations, which he views as simplified versions of rich texts. After his career as a screenwriter, Martin went back to writing novels because he grew tired of the continuous polishing and cutting that goes along with making literature digestible for film. In the interview, he states, "Everything you can't do in television and film, of course you can do in prose because you're everything there. You're the director, you're the special effects coordinator, you're the costume department, and you don't have to worry about a budget."
He didn't have a problem selling the property though for millions of dollars.
Yeah,
So,
not very principled, does he?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing that reflected
if it doesn't
in
influence your actions. It's not exactly
right.
principled.
Yeah, he's like, well, I hate these adaptations as he's like burning money for
Depositing his
heat.
gigantic
Yeah,
checks.
I know.
I
God,
can't believe-
so
Why did
trite and low class.
Why did you foist this on your audience then? Like,
Yeah.
why didn't you just forgo the adaptation and said, no, my principles are such that I cannot accept all of this gigantic bags of cash. I can't accept these gigantic bags of cash. I have to reject them and I have to finish Winds of Winter. I can't be part of that. It's going to distract me from finishing the story. Nope, that's not what he did. Not only did he totally accept money from the adaptations, apparently without any concern. I mean, no, well, maybe he had a concern, maybe he had a qualm, maybe they gave him reassurances, but here's the thing. The adaptations ended up being the end of his story, right? And that isn't going to change anytime soon. I know everybody's holding out hope, but at this point, it doesn't seem like he's going to finish. So he not only did he accept his work being turned into an adaptation, he accepted that adaptation being the final word on his work. Okay, I don't know what else to say with this.
It's a bitter digression, but there, you know who was very protective of their IP though? You know who was like someone that didn't want anyone trying to adapt his work and also had an R in his an RR in his name. But let's get into more of the video. So.
Yeah, because it's not really about Martin. It's
not really about that.
Martin was initially apprehensive about allowing Hollywood to adapt his series because he viewed it as something that was fundamentally unadaptable. The gratuitous sex, violence, and sheer density of his text was something that he was unwilling to sacrifice for the big screen. But as we entered the 2010s and the television show as we knew it grew into a formidable beast, the serialized cinematic masterpiece, things changed. When Dan Weiss and David Benioff approached Martin with a book-to-season, authentic adaptation of A Song of Ice and Fire, it was difficult to resist. He said, "You meet a lot of people in Hollywood who say, 'Yeah, I love it, I love it, I love it,' but it doesn't seem quite real. But I could tell, or at least it seemed to me, that David and Dan were real and they wanted to make the kind of show I wanted made."
I'm just pausing there for the banana because I don't know how she's going to be about this. Although I will say that True Detective, now that is a great show. Very good show. Highly recommend it. Only season 1 though. Every season is it's its own self-contained story, so you don't have to watch anything else, but the first season is a complete, it's a flat circle. All right, anyway.
Okay, I just wanted to comment on this. All right, so he sat down with these people, these individuals, and they talked about the story. At any point, did he say something like, "Yeah, I'll have it done by the end, by the time we get there"? Because the way that I'm seeing this set up is that, it's these guys who are to blame for all of this. But I mean, he didn't have the series done, and they knew that going in. Was that discussed? Like, was any concern? I mean, this is a digression, but I'm sort of balking at this idea that George R.R. Martin is a victim of the showrunners.
Yeah. I agree.
Because it just doesn't. I mean, like, even if you say, oh, they adapted it poorly, are you telling me that first of all, did he say he was going to get this done for them to be able to adapt the final books?
I mean, how can you claim that? How could you claim that something is unadaptable and yet work with the people who tried to adapt it, and you have an unfinished product? Like, are you just, you know what I mean? Like, are you just like, well, I know that my work is it's unadaptable because it's so dense. There's so much going on, but I'll let you guys do it, and also I'm not going to finish it.
Like, what was the conversation that they had? Like, is he saying, okay, well, I'm going to get this done? Were they saying, well, when we get to this point, how are we going to resolve it? Like, did he just hand over this property to these individuals, and then just sort of skate away? Like, I mean, again, in this scenario, I don't think you can really say that Martin is the victim here. But I guess we're going to try.
Well, yeah, I think that I'm assuming the person who wrote the essay is a big fan of the books and has problems with the show, and she's trying to make both of those things work in her head at the same time.
Well,
but I don't know.
It's easy. You just, like, the show is different, but the thing is that there's no indication that to bring it back on topic, there's no indication that Martin didn't intend Daenerys to be the ultimate villain. And there has been some information that's come out that, they didn't create this ending in a vacuum. Like, they were given direction by Martin. And I think that's a pretty big statement. Like, it's a pretty big aspect of the story to just invent whole cloth. So, but what I'm getting at is, if Martin had these discussions with them, sat down with them, talked to them, knowing that his work was unfinished, they must have talked about what they were going to do. Either that he would have a finished piece by the time they got there, or how they were going to finish the story once the show caught up with the writing. Or if they didn't, then he really, he's talking about how, adaptations, herp-a-derp. Well, that you didn't even have the most essential conversations about adapting your unfinished work, like how it ends. Okay.
All right, well, let's watch some more.
Yeah.
Weiss and Benioff, under the watchful eye of Martin, faithfully brought A Song of Ice and Fire to life. The overarching themes, messages, and immense details from the books were all there, and the show was a massive success. It was intellectualized high fantasy on a low-culture medium, which was adored by nerds and normies alike. It brought to life an immense ensemble cast, giving each character attention and fleshing out the nuances of their arcs over many seasons. Perhaps the most beloved and recognizable face to come out of Game of Thrones was Daenerys Targaryen, portrayed by Emilia Clarke. Beyond her beautiful looks, Daenerys was a favorite because her storyline always stood out amongst the rest.
I'm just pausing there for the banana. You want to say anything about that, or should we just keep going?
Okay, well, she hasn't come to the conclusion of how her storyline stood out among the rest.
Well, I think she's about to explain how it's
so let's
unique.
just get there.
All right.
The mysterious cultures, beautiful landscapes, and epic conquests of Essos were a far cry from the slow-burning political character drama occurring on the other side of the Narrow Sea. Daenerys in the show,
I will
much like her book.
I will give her. The Daenerys storyline was far more interesting. Like, to be quite frank, the way that these other cultures were rendered was really simplistic and stereotypical. But that's not really a problem with the show. I think it's also a problem with the books. I'm actually probably going to read I have read Martin's short stories, and I actually find it better than his writing on Song of Ice and Fire. More interesting, actually more nuanced in terms of their characters. So I'm actually going to try out some other of his books, just in case this is an issue just with his approach to this particular subject matter.
Yeah.
So, it's like, I'm not saying he's a bad writer. I am a little bit like I can't agree with how he's approaching the adaptation thing and what happened, and I don't think we can absolve him of responsibility for whether or not the show ended in a debacle. But the cultures depicted in Essos, that wasn't really that great, honestly. And again, I don't think it was the show. They weren't really that detailed. Basically they just felt like these are the villains.
Yeah.
And it wasn't much deeper than that from what I remember.
They were just the other
visually. Yeah. I mean, well, let's take the Dothraki. You know, they're supposedly based on the Plains Indians and the Mongols. So the Mongol horde. Like,
oh, this is the yeah, sure.
Well, okay. Here, the problem with that is, for example, and this is a big thing, like, where is the material culture? Like, if you then probably the Mongols would be the closest. Basically, Martin says that it based them on these cultures. He listed some Plains Indian culture, Plains Indian or Plains Native. Please don't kill me for that. Plains Native ethnic groups and the Mongols. And he said, but with a dash of fantasy, but there's not really anything based on those cultures in there. Like, for example, if we're basing them on the Mongols didn't wear clothing like that. And I mean, they were very big into trade and fine things. So they would have worn silk brocaded robes and stuff. But the way that they're portrayed is more like a stereotype about Plains people than the actual reality of what Plains people looked like. Because even, I mean, I don't even want to say even, Plains natives had very intricate clothing. The buckskin was almost like a type of cloth, and then it was very elaborately decorated. So when you look at these cultures, in a way they did have like in some cases they had a very compelling visual presentation overall, but then you look at the material aspects of their culture and sort of lacking. This is a big digression. I apologize, but yeah, let's keep going. I'm just digressed.
All right. No, it's all right. Let's just
Book version begins her journey with nothing. She lives in fear of her delusional brother, but her innocence allows her to dream wistfully of a better future for herself. As the show goes on, we watch Daenerys use her hopes and dreams to overcome bleak situations and make the most of what she has. However, Daenerys is not without flaws. Often, her youthful naivety prevents her from seeing the nuances of the world around her. She makes broad, sweeping decisions and fails to understand things beyond what they are on the surface. The earliest example of this is at the end of Season 1, when Daenerys witnesses some Dothraki men attempting to rape a woman after they have pillaged a village. Daenerys, ignoring the advice of her handmaidens, orders the men to stop and brings the woman under her consort.
All right, I'm just pausing there again.
Okay.
For the banana.
Did you read the first chapter? And also, like, subsequent chapters. The first chapter where we're introduced to Daenerys, she displays a detachment from other people's experiences and suffering from the very first chapter. Right? And then her response, and yeah, I know her brother was abusive and awful, but still, he has molten gold poured on him and dies horribly in front of her. And her only statement is something like he wasn't of the dragon because he didn't resist the heat of the molten gold.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, there's something wrong with this woman. There's something deeply screwed in her brain, and it was there from the beginning. The problem is I think people who have this kind of superficial analysis don't notice that because they latch on, or it's almost like they smooth out the moral problems of female characters. Like the fact that she doesn't have emotional responses to certain things. She has emotional responses when it comes to the things that she wants. But outside of that, like there's a disconnect with her ability to empathize. That's very clear. And I'm not like, yeah, sure, props to her that she wanted to intervene to prevent this woman from being raped. But and the other thing is that she's trying to present this as a flaw. Like, she's so naive, she doesn't realize how evil the world is. That's not a flaw. Okay, this is a flaw, right? People need to know this. This is a flaw. A flaw is how a character is hurting others. That's a flaw. It's not, oh, she's so clumsy. Oh, she's naive. Yeah. She just wants to see the world. It's so beautiful. And she can't deal with the world as... No, these are not flaws. These are character traits, but they're not flaws. A flaw for Daenerys is how she hurts others. Okay? And it may not be clear at first because she doesn't really have the opportunity to do so. At least until the story goes further on. But okay, let's keep going.
All right, let's play some more.
Believing she has saved this woman named Mirri Maz Duur, Daenerys thinks she is owed her gratitude and service. She blindly trusts the woman, who claims to be a healer, to cure Khal Drogo's festering wound. Ignoring the culture of the Dothraki,
oh, by the way,
and skeptical of which
Drogo got that wound defending his wife from her strange behavior.
Yeah.
So she said, let's free these people we've been fighting, raiding, and one of his, I think, second in command, or one of his underlings, basically challenged him and wounded him, and he managed to kill the guy. So in challenging the Dothraki traditions, she gets her husband killed, essentially. But that's not really... I mean, fair enough. She couldn't have foreseen that.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
Yeah. But at the same time, if we're dealing with a culture that harsh... Anyway, let's keep going.
Witches. She allows Mirri Maz Duur to perform blood magic on Khal Drogo. Unbeknownst to Dany, Mirri Maz Duur had never intended to help her. In Mirri Maz Duur's eyes, Dany's people had slaughtered her village, repeatedly raped her before Dany had found her, and blasphemously burned down her temples. In her eyes, Dany was a villain who had brought her into captivity. Ultimately...
Hey, isn't that the chick that falsely accused Mark Pearson? Is that the lady?
Which one?
The blood healer lady from that episode.
And blasphemously burned down.
I know that, okay, I can't remember her name. Sawad Fares is her name. I can say it because I'm not in the UK. But Sawad Fares is an actor that was on Game of Thrones. I think she played this
in her eyes, Dany
woman,
was a villain.
Her right here, this woman, and she accused Mark Pearson of sexual assault. I think this is the woman that did that. Just a bit of trivia for you guys. She falsely accused him. I think it's this woman, but I don't hold me to it. I know it's a woman that was on this show though.
Yeah, I remember that her look was pretty weird for this kind of show. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it is that individual. She's got black hair instead of blonde.
Well, yeah, but I'm pretty sure she's wearing a wig here.
Who had brought her into captivity. Ultimately, Dany's naive belief that she had saved this woman led to the death of her husband and her unborn child. This flaw is inherent to the character of Daenerys. We watch her approach different cultures and cities with the same overarching belief that she is here to save people. We watch her ignore the customs and norms of these cultures and instead bestow upon them her own beliefs. For example...
So basically she is... she believes that her problem is that she is a white savior. I mean, I don't want to put it that way, but I have a feeling that's where this is going. But she doesn't understand all these other cultures and how complex they are, and she's another ignorant white woman who has to save people. She didn't say that, but that's what it sounds like. Anyway.
She crucifies the slave masters in Meereen without a trial because she believes slavery is wrong. But she does not understand that slavery, however unjust, is the economy in Meereen, the system which holds it together. She enters cities intending to help people, but leaves them more damaged and lawless in her wake. For me, this is what made...
Okay, also, there's something that's sort of being glossed over. She uses a slave armory to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, technically there was like a scene where she says, I'm giving you your freedom, who wants to work? But these were men or boys who were castrated and taught their entire life to obey. like you can't, like, basically that's just making yourself feel better. Right. The only way not to be complicit in that system is to not use your slave army, period. And the fact that she's using a slave army to free the slaves is a pretty dramatic irony, I would have to say. And ultimately it does indicate a little bit of pragmatism, I suppose, on her part, because she's willing to use slavery when it benefits her and when it can lead to supposedly the ends that she wants. Again, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure why she was so obsessed with ending slavery. I mean, in particular, because she's part of that system. No doubt she had slaves of her own when she was younger because she was living in the house of a very wealthy merchant. But so she's like obsessed with this. Not sure why, because I thought she would be obsessed with getting her throne back, or it was suggested she might be, but then it sort of switched to this. So in my personal opinion, this could have been, like, even the desire to free the slaves could have been better established, or even having a pragmatic reason for doing it, like destabilizing the current power structure so she can gain power and add these groups to her trousseau, or her like her lands as a conqueror. But it's, yeah. Anyway, I think that the motive was not very well established, but let's continue.
All right.
Dany an amazing conqueror, but a terrible ruler. I believe that naivety is Daenerys' tragic flaw. It is here I will argue that Martin has not planned for Daenerys Targaryen to become a villain, but rather a tragic hero. And in this video, I will demonstrate how the showrunners have greatly misinterpreted this concept. The Greek
like when she like goes bananas. All right, let's play let's now. I think she's getting to her actual argument.
The way that she establishes it is she is acknowledging that Daenerys completely ignores the cultural situation and the economic situation. So Marine, which is an interesting, there was one, I guess, city that was more of like a Spartan, I suppose, type of slave owning society. So there's like there's Sparta, and then there's a place like Rome, right? And there's different attitudes towards slavery. I know that this is probably going to get us maybe banned, but not all forms of slavery were the same. So you have the Spartan form of slavery and more of an archaic form of slavery in which the slaves are considered livestock because they failed to fight and win or die in the process. So the way that older, like more archaic attitudes towards what we consider human rights was basically, if you weren't willing, if you weren't able to defend yourself physically through violence, and you were willing to submit yourself to slavery, you became human livestock. And if your parents did that, you were born as human livestock. So it was a stigma. Like, it was basically you failed to put freedom above life. So if you were a human who chose servitude and life before freedom, you are no longer considered human. You were considered to have the instincts and the base nature of an animal. So turning you into livestock was acceptable. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
And turning your children into livestock was acceptable. It's probably why you see things like, it wasn't the Cimbri, but there was a battle of the Cimbri where Rome basically finally defeated the horde of northern barbarians that were, impinging on northern Italy, or perhaps it was like southern France, but anyway, somewhere there. And when the line of the German barbarians, when it broke, the men started to run, and the women would slit their throats. Their own women would slit their throats, the fleeing men, and then they would kill themselves and their children. So it was a complete self-annihilation. So you lost, you killed yourself, because the alternative was to lose your right to consider yourself human.
KYS.
And so, I mean, there's that attitude towards slavery. It's much more the archaic attitude. Then there was more of the Roman attitude towards slavery, which was actually distinctly different. And the other thing is that you can see why Spartans had to be so tough, because they had to be able to physically subjugate their slaves at a moment's notice and prove that they were human, that they were willing to preserve their sense of freedom, even to the point of death. That's why they were such, they were hard asses. But the Romans had, and I think Marine, with bringing this back to the story, the city of Marine, which is where Daenerys really shows her stripes, in my opinion, her tyrannical stripes. The city of Marine is, I think, more closely based on Rome, just judging from all of the kind of stereotypical stuff that's going on in the story. So I think it's based on Rome. And again, the Roman system of slavery was different. So how is it different? Essentially, it was a legal classification. So it wasn't like a permanent state of being. It wasn't that you were not human. It was that you were legally classified differently.
It's like serfdom, maybe.
Not even.
Or maybe you owed, like you had debts and you did that to pay them off.
Well, let's put it this way: like they would bring slaves in. If you were a productive slave, if you got a job, you earned money, you participated in society, you could buy your way out of slavery. There was manumission through basically purchasing your contract. So, and this was possible, made actually pretty possible. In fact, there was a slave who said that it was fairly, with some effort, you could get out of it in like 14 years or something. And it was made more possible because the professions in Rome were mostly available to women and slaves. So the jobs that men were allowed to take were basically farmer, fighter, and statesman. That's it. So women did a lot of the other stuff. I mean, they could own property and get other people to do the labor, but so there was the ability there was that kind of mobility in their society for people who were seen as slaves. And buying your way out of a contract is very different than being a slave by virtue of your ancestor having given up your right to be considered human. Yeah. So there was a different, and the other thing is that if you think about it, this particular system, because Rome started with some pretty marginal people from the get-go, it is about the only way that you can really redeem a system, like the overall system that Rome existed within, which was very much like slavery was just a thing back then, period. But they had created a system in which slaves could eventually be freed. And they actually were freed from the previous system, which is if your parents were subjugated in war, you were a slave. That's it. Your livestock, done. You just exist in that. You just exist as a lesser being now. And they constructed a system where you could actually rehabilitate people and get them into a productive, get them productive materially, like in terms of their work. Bring them in, get them productive, free them, and then build your society like that. I mean, if you think about it, it's almost like it's more of a rehabilitation of a previous attitude towards slavery than anything. And yes, I know this is more like the ideal description rather than necessarily completely the reality. But compare Rome to everywhere else. Like Rome was the light. Yeah, I hate to tell you. Mm-hmm. So if Marina was based on Rome, they already had an incredibly liberal approach to slavery, and their economy, their entire economy, or a good portion of their economy, was driven by the process of freeing slaves. So, you participate in the economy. After a certain amount of time, if you are productive, you're able to purchase your contract, get out, or pay your master back, get freed, move and become a freedman. So, like right there, the way that Dany is approaching and again, the first city seemed like it was more on the Spartan model, like slaves are permanently an underclass, a stigmatized underclass. The second city, it's like, do you really want to destroy that? Because I can tell you that the amount of slave cities that you can free, and specifically get rid of slavery, and how do you construct a new economy in a world that is based on slavery? I mean, all of this stuff is not considered. So and again, she really starts like the where the rubber meets the road for her authoritarian tendencies was in Marina or Marianan or whatever. I think it was Marina. Okay, so let's keep listening.
All right.
Philosopher Aristotle wrote, "A perfect tragedy should imitate actions which excite pity and fear, this being the distinctive mark of tragic imitation. The character between these two extremes, that of a man who is not eminently good and just, yet whose misfortune is brought about not by vice or depravity, but by some error or frailty. For me, Daenerys' error is this naivety I speak of." Let's rewrite the show with Daenerys as a tragic hero. If we ignore seasons 6 to 8 and begin again in Meereen, we could watch Daenerys as she continues to use ruthlessness in her fight to liberate the oppressed.
I'm
just pausing it there for the banana. And now that she's like beginning this point.
One of the things that she did is, she actually put to death a whole class of people based on the fact that they were the ruling class. One of whom she killed was actually an abolitionist, but she killed him because he was part of the ruling class. So she wasn't making decisions based on any kind of understanding of the individual character, but just based on class, just based on groups. So she was engaging in collectivist punishment at this point. And the other thing that she did was there was some kind of insurrection, and she brought a bunch of the elites to her dragon pit, and she, in front of these people that she'd gathered up as, I guess, suspect ringleaders, she executed one of them. In fact, I think she executed the father of one of them. So she had him burnt to death. And then she just is like, I was going to execute you all, but I've decided to give you clemency for this moment. So you'll go back to your slave cells, or your prison cells. So she sends these people back, or these men back. And then the next scene, she decides to marry the one whose father she just flambéed. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the sequence and all the relationships between these characters. But so she goes into that guy's cell and she basically says, "Yeah, you're going to marry me." I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like that whole sequence is one of the most psychotic things I've seen in the entire show. Like, if any of the male characters had done that, they'd flambéed the mother of a woman that they were holding captive and almost executed themselves. Like, they just stopped her at the moment of being executed and like, well, maybe not today. And then went to their chamber or their cell and said, "Oh, we're married. We're getting married now." I'm sorry, they would consider that man the epitome of evil, but for some reason, Daenerys gets a freaking pass. I wonder why. We need some Jeopardy music. Like,
all right.
Let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going.
She continues to be despised by the people who flourished in the former system and becomes increasingly frightened due to many attempts at her life. With the help of her army, she is forced to abandon Meereen, leaving behind a political vacuum. Maybe now, with no strings, she thinks the time is nigh to sail to Westeros and take the Iron Throne, and begins a campaign in Westeros to gain more support.
Why did she go after Meereen in the first place?
I didn't watch it, so
yeah,
I don't have the answer to that question.
Yeah, I know.
It's rhetorical.
It's rhetorical. It's just like, okay, let's keep going.
It is mixed because the small folk remember a harsher time under the Mad King, and Daenerys becomes increasingly frustrated. In haste, she burns Cersei in the Red Keep, but in doing so accidentally sets off the wildfire and burns innocents. Due to the muddled flow of information in Westeros, the small folk and nobility think this was intentional, so she is now feared by her people and hated by potential allies. This is when Daenerys descends into madness, becoming like her father. But we see now that...
No, my dear, no. Daenerys wasn't descending into madness at that point. That's just when it became clear to you. Daenerys was already beyond the pale in Meereen and what she was doing, in engaging in collective punishment, in terrorizing this man and then forcing him to marry her. Like this, if she had been a man, you wouldn't be saying this. You wouldn't be saying, well, We should soften his later behavior. Well, okay, but then you're making a Yui. You're not actually fixing anything. You're basically, Daenerys was here when she was in Marine. She was this evil, right? And you're saying, well, we could have made Daenerys going further. We could just have made her less evil. Well, her peak of evil was almost in Marine. Like, the only thing that reduced how much she could actually do was the big dragon was gone for a while. So her peak of evil, like, just sort of creepy, grotesque evil was in Marine. And I mean, in terms of actual damage, she just goes up. But in terms of moral depravity, she's pretty bad in Marine. So you can't just ignore that. Be like, oh, well, she's fine in Marine. No, she's only fine because you didn't notice. Like, and you didn't notice because you didn't care. You're like, oh, these people, like, they're just slavers. They're just Nazis. We don't have to care about Nazis. we can engage in collective punishment over whoever the loudest voice declares a Nazi. So basically the morality of our society is whoever can convince the most amount of other people their opponent is a Nazi is the one who wins and gets to kill the Nazi. Like, anyway, so she was already engaging in collective punishment. She was already engaging in, like, forced marriage, for God's sake, and presumably also, like, considering the force on the guy. If that marriage was in any way consummated, I would pin rapist on Daenerys too. So, well, I think that you're saying, no, just don't have her become more evil, like that she became more. The premise is that she became more evil in Westeros. She's pretty evil in Marine. Oh, it's a matter of degree, not. It's a matter of not kind, but scope, shall we say? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
She just let her evil. She got her evil on, but it was already there. She got her evil on in Westeros, but also, I mean, honestly, if there was ever a country or a continent or a people that could justify tyrannical rule, it's Westeros. I'm sorry. Like, I have absolutely almost no sympathy for anyone in Westeros. I have yet to meet a sympathetic character from Westeros. Let me think. Is that for true? Am I going to stand behind that? The original king in House of Dragons was sort of sympathetic. Okay, let's go.
All right, more of this.
The madness is not an innate consequence of the pure Targaryen bloodline, but is the product of her fatal flaw. Her desire to help people, but her inability to understand the nuances of oppression within political systems. In this story, Dany is a tragic hero. But this did not happen in the show.
Yes, because it wasn't intended. Do you honestly, you think that Martin sat down without his property finished and they never had a conversation of what happens if they get to the point where, no, I'm pretty sure he's already said that the showrunners actually were looking at this in terms of what he had actually told them, so that he was actually part of the ending to some degree, or at least he gave them an outline of what he thought would happen. Yeah. And the other thing is, your condemnation is basically you're just whitewashing Marine. Like, you're just pretending it didn't happen. Like, the psychotic shit that happened that she did in there just didn't happen. Okay. Oh, and the other thing is that what really cued me in Marine, one of the things that really cued me in is she engages in this kind of horrific torture and an assassination. Can you imagine you're being marched in a group to a dragon pit to be flambéed, dismembered, and eaten by a dragon? And the first person in front of you has just been flambéed, dismembered. He's like, his blood is splattered over your face. And this woman's just sitting there, like, yep, next one. Oh, wait, no. Oh, what? Clemency, I'll save you for later. I don't want to overfeed my dragons. Like, can you imagine that? And then that same woman has a problem with gladiatorial combat between men who have consented to be gladiators. That was clarified. And there's these two guys facing off as gladiators for her honor. And it's established that they have consented to do it because they want to earn their freedom or whatever. And she's like, oh my God, this is so gross. Why? Because it's not violence that you explicitly determined was correct in your schema. Like, she's not offended by violence. That's the thing. She's only offended by violence when it exists outside of her control, or something that she doesn't think is morally correct according to her fucked up morals. But she's absolutely fine with like horrific violence, as long as she feels it's justified. That's terrifying. Like, and then, okay, so how much violence can she justify? Like, really, that's what the story became. It's like, how much violence can Daenerys justify? All right, she can justify nuking an entire city. Well, there you go. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
The guidance of Martin, and in an effort to move on to other projects, the showrunners reneged on their promise to produce an authentic adaptation and began cutting corners. This is where George R.R. Martin's worst fears about Hollywood.
Stop. Lady, what was there to adapt? He didn't finish it.
Yeah.
They reneged on their promise to do an authentic adaptation. Well, if there was a promise to do an authentic adaptation, that would require a thing to adapt. And who reneged on their promise to have a thing to adapt? Like, this really sounds like this didn't end in the way this Daenerys fangirl who didn't see Daenerys already jumping off the slippery slope in Meereen doesn't like the fact that Daenerys jumping off the slippery slope in Meereen ended with her being Dragon Hitler. Like, I mean, that was one of the best parts of the freaking show. I had no problem. Well, okay, let me put it this way. I watched it, and Daenerys' arc, I felt like they could have focused on it more. And they could have taken more time with the culture she was a part of. I don't know why we spent so much time in Westeros except unless you were establishing the idea that her coming over, like, I can't believe, like, unless they're trying to establish the fact that the Wastrosian are so awful that they deserve Dragon Hitler, I don't know why we spent so much time with them. Like, I honestly don't. It would have been much more fun to spend time with Daenerys and allow the descent into madness, or not even madness, because it wasn't madness. It was just ideological possession. To allow that descent into ideological possession play out a little bit more slowly, a little bit more concretely, and do the right kind of writing to really bring it out. But as for the broad strokes of her character arc, no problem with it. I thought that was, I mean, in terms of broad strokes, it was well done. It could have been slowed down. It could have been clarified. They could have spent a little bit more time letting it cook and presenting it better. But broad strokes, it was great. I mean, that was the best part of it.
It could be that the money was drying up, or the contracts were, for the actors were running out, and they were going to be doing other projects. I know a lot of these people from this show went on to do other things, most of them failures, but they still were, they had other obligations. So there could be other things in motion that made it to where that was going to happen. I could see that. So anyway, go do some more.
Yeah, sure. Let's get through this.
Confirmed. Abandoning important political powers such as Dorne and simplifying intelligent characters like Tyrion, the showrunners are expediently bulldozing their way to the end. Nothing has made this more clear than Daenerys' 2-episode turn to the dark side. As I said
Tyrion
before,
was never
Daenerys is
clever.
ruthless and oftentimes too ambitious. But from where she stood in Season 8, Episode 1, just 4 episodes prior, she would never burn innocent civilians after they have surrendered.
Okay, I could see it. Honestly, the real thing that bugged me was that wasn't really done well in terms of a craft level. But I can get into that. But lady, she's already, like, you're saying, oh, she wouldn't burn innocent civilians. The dudes that she was killing were innocent.
Yeah.
Like, I know you're like, oh, they're on the top of the slavery pyramid. Yeah, but we're on the top of the slavery pyramid, lady. It's called the world reserve currency. We print money, other people give us shit, and they live in horrible circumstances in order to make that product that we get. You know, and that situation was earned through men killing and dying in war. So, you know, I'm pretty sure that future generations will look back at us and think, oh, yeah, we should be burned to death by Dragon Hitler because none of us are innocent. That's bullshit. That's collective punishment. Like, first of all, when you're going to a city like Marine, maybe ascertain their actual philosophy and if it differs from perhaps the previous city that she took over, which was a bit more black and white because it was more like a Sparta. Sorry, Sparta was a slave pyre. Like it's not something that we should admire too much. I mean, I guess you can admire the fact that they were so hard ass, but other than that, they were squalid and sort of hateful. I don't like Sparta. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
but you know, like, but they were more archaic. They had that attitude that if you did not fight and die fighting, if you allowed yourself to be subjugated, you lost your right to be considered human because you put your own survival, your instinct for survival over your desire for freedom. And that was the demarcation between being human and not being human. All right. That's a big difference. And yeah, so she took over Sparta. Might makes right. She forced them to free the slaves. She's actually buying into that particular framework. She's the mightiest. She makes the rules. But then you get to a more mercantile society like Marine, and they have a different approach to slavery. That approach you can actually work with. Like, you know, couldn't you have, I don't know, made money and helped the slaves earn out their contracts, or help teach them ways to earn out their contracts? Like, or I mean, there's something workable there, especially considering everywhere else is the shithole that you first conquered. Like, couldn't you be more in partnership with the attitudes of the Marine, like their attitudes, if they're more progressive, because they sound like they're more progressive. In fact, if that is based on Rome, they were more progressive compared to everyone else. Yeah. Like saying a slave can earn their way out of slavery. Holy shit. You're not saying they're permanent livestock? What the hell? Are you a bunch of freaking hippies down there? Like, you could work with that. And she made no effort. Instead, she's just executing the people responsible for this system with no willingness to see any kind of nuance outside of who she has decided what collective groups are wrong and what collective groups are right. And incidentally, it ultimately seems to fall down on Daenerys wants everyone to be her slave and do what she says. So when she went to King's Landing, which was the city that she flambéed, like she nuked the entire city, and she was looking on the walls of the city. So she had her dragon perched and she was watching all these people like fleeing in terror from her. I think that the reason why she did it, logically, or logic in her mind, was that because she knew she would never be recognized as their savior. And the reason why she would never be recognized as their savior is because there was already a Targaryen. They found out there was a secret Targaryen who was already a big part of who'd already done things to save parts of the parts of Westeros. So she had a contender, and that contender had a stronger claim on the throne and was also not directly threatening everyone. So that threat to her and that feeling like she was the one who was saving everyone, that she had to share the spotlight, that's what drove her to do it, in my opinion. Now, that could have been more clearly stated if they wanted to go there, or more clearly expressed somehow. Like, I totally agree that was not developed as much as it could be, but it was there. And now the moment when she makes her decision to kill everyone and to enact this collective punishment, she probably, and this is a craft issue, this is a writerly craft issue. There should have been an external stimulus that sparked that genocidal rage. And the external stimulus should have been like the head, because they actually captured and executed one of her chief advisors and friends. And she should have just seen the head of that woman on a spike or something. And then that would have just went boop. And I think a lot of people would have bought it more if they had that external stimulus. You're not really supposed to have characters just act, without an external stimulus. Like, there should always be something that they're reacting to externally, especially in movies. So to have her just fly up to the wall and cling to it and then look around and then just suddenly start to flambe people is always not going to read very right. But that's just a craft thing. Just imagine instead that she flies up to the wall, sees her friend's head on a pike, and then starts killing people, because she's already shown that she's a believer in collective punishment. Yeah. And this city allowed her friend to die, or executed her friend. All right, there you go. Bada bing.
There
Problem
you go.
solved. Okay.
All right, I got a couple super chows and a super chat. So,
cool.
Richard Bier gives us $5 and says, methinks that perhaps Manifestel hails from Westeros. Great Indoors gives us $5 and says, punch some slave owners in the face and then flambe them with your Raven Moon dragon. Hashtag spirit cooking. And then I got a super chat from Albert Nader Retro for $5 Canadian. And he says, slaves fighting as gladiators to earn their freedom are not doing so of their free will. Their choice is compromised based on being slaves.
That's not the point.
Yeah, you're missing the point. But anyway.
The point is that they are engaging in, actually, I think they were convicts of some kind, fighting for their
criminals.
freedom.
Yeah.
Criminals. I mean, generally a lot of the gladiators were criminals, but regardless, they had chosen to engage in the fight. Now, maybe it's not consent by your standard, but it also does not explain why she's fine with executing a person by dragon, but not gladiatorial combat. Like, I'm pretty sure the guy didn't consent to being dismembered and eaten by a dragon either. Okay, let's keep going.
All right, let's get back to the video.
For Aristotle, the defining moment in a tragedy is catharsis, the release of these feelings of pity and fear, the moment the spectator sees themselves in the protagonist and experiences a release of emotion when that character meets their fate. It is the moment Oedipus finally realizes his part in the plight of his people, exclaiming about himself, "No man living is more wretched than Oedipus." It is the moment Macbeth knows it is his blind ambition that led to the death of his wife, the downfall of his rule, and his inevitable end. As an audience, we know the character does not deserve such a terrible demise, but we understand the route that got them there. This has been portrayed in...
Was that Juliet?
Yeah, she's talking she's talking about tragic heroes. It's...
modern television before. A perfect example is Breaking Bad, where Walter White begins his journey with pure intentions, but over time it becomes clear that his flaw is his desire to make something better of himself, to prove to himself that he is capable. And this leads to his demise. We reach catharsis as we watch him die, his reputation destroyed and his loved ones alienated. But the seeds are planted from the beginning. There are several moments of catharsis in Game of Thrones, which makes it such a compelling story. We reach the end over and over and over again, but like life, the plot keeps going. We understand why respectable characters like Ned, Robb, Catelyn, or Oberyn die. We do not think they deserve such a brutal punishment, but we reach catharsis when we see them realize their mistakes. Game of Thrones...
All right, I'm pausing there for the banana, just to make sure it's safe. Don't come after us, bro. Who is this? Broey Deschanel?
Good God, why would she? 400,000 subscribers. We're just at 10. So who cares, right? Keep on.
Thrones is unconventional, turning the tropes of high fantasy on their head. But it is still a story, and like many other stories, it should reach a satisfying end, a moment of catharsis. The ultimate moment would be when we see Daenerys, someone we've been rooting for but who we've grown weary of due to her inability to understand her flaw, finally realize that flaw the moment she meets her demise. But as Weiss and Benioff have demonstrated throughout the past couple of seasons, They are determined to keep the story unpredictable and have been bending the logic and core themes of the show in order to meet that goal.
Essentially, this individual says that her fatal flaw is not her black and white moral thinking. And specifically, what's interesting is that there is a point in the previous aspect, or the previous seasons, way back, when I think it's the guy who's her hand, like her second in command, basically describes how her father just basically never questioned himself morally. So he was self-righteous. He felt like he was always doing the right thing and never questioned himself morally. And then she does exactly the same thing. In fact, she says, "Are you comparing me to my father?" And because she gets offended, and he says, "No, I'm not. I'm just saying that this is what your father did. You're not necessarily your father." And then she becomes the same as her father. Like, I mean, it's pretty clear. And that was, I think, well before the show, we ran out of runway. George Morton failed to start, paving more runway for the showrunners. So I think that you're just missing what Daenerys' true fatal flaw is. It's not that she's not multicultural enough, I guess. It's not that she's naive. That's not really a flaw, by the way.
No, I know, but that's what she said. She said that she was naive.
Like, literally from the very start, you're wrong, because a flaw has to be hurting other people. Her problem is that she believes she's right. She doesn't have doubt.
Yeah.
Okay. And she is committed to this idea of collective punishment. She's not looking at the scenario that people should be judged by their individual actions. She sees people in terms of groups, and these groups, this person from this group did me wrong, therefore they're all to blame. Or this person from this group harmed the slaves, therefore they're all to blame. Right? Mm-hmm. Now, up to this point, she has taken on slaves as sort of like a purse puppy. So, I am justifying my morality based on how whether or not this person liberates or enslaves people, which is fair. You don't like slavers, but like I said, there's a bit of a gradient there. If you think about it, if Marine is based on Rome, you can almost think of Rome as like a transition point where you're starting to rehabilitate people from a previous attitude that was much worse. Right. But regardless, she thinks of people in terms of groups. And initially she judges those groups based on her purse puppy, which is slaves. Right. And then she basically executes them based on group guilt. Once you get to Westeros, there are no slaves. So who is she going to judge everybody on morally? Her own manifest destiny, herself, and whether or not they offend her, right? I mean, that seems to be fairly well supported based on the stuff that was said about her and her actions. But because she doesn't have something to externalize to feel like a savior with Westeros anymore, because the slaves are not, like, they don't have slaves. I think they have serfs. Not quite sure the difference in Westeros, but apparently there is.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Let's keep going.
Okay. I got a couple super chats. So Albert Data Retro sent us two super chats, $2 Canadian. He said in the first one, Walter White was a scumbag, not a hero. He misspelled White, corrected in the other super chat where he says White, not Wire. Sorry. So yeah, got it. Thank you. And we're going to move on now to the next part of the video.
Ignoring the character arcs of people like Jon in order to shock the audience when Arya jumps out and kills the Night King only shocks the audience because it's unexpected. But this shock is not accompanied by catharsis. Rather, it's just followed by feelings of confusion and even frustration.
Why would we have catharsis based on who killed the Night King? You've just established we have catharsis when the tragic hero realizes their flaw at the moment of their demise. Like, that's not the arc. Like Arya Stark's arc, if you could really consider it one, is just a basic heroic. I mean, she doesn't have any personal realization about anything that she does to others, that she has a catharsis. Like, it's not there. And I don't think it would be, because she's not a tragic hero. But go ahead.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be the what I think she's trying to say, because people were talking about that scene, isn't the issue that people were expecting Jon Snow to be the one to defeat the Night King, because I mean that's what everything seemed to be building up to, and it just seemed like a big fuck you, and they just took it away from him and they just had her do it. And I don't know if that was simply, you know, like, oh, we're betraying all of the expectations. Here we go, subverted, you know, and it was kind of like, yeah, and people were like, what the fuck? And I think that
justifiably, really.
Yeah, well, that's what she's commenting on, is that it didn't give us catharsis, because it in our, I guess what she's saying is we should have, well, the viewers were expecting it to be Jon Snow to be the one, but it wasn't. It was Arya Stark, and they were like, "Why?" And then because I think that I don't know. I think that this is one of the things about Game of Thrones that is frustrating, and why I don't watch it, is that I think that there's more interest in doing things that have never been done in this way before, specifically to subvert expectations, and not all of it lands. And you get this sense that like there is no order to things. Everything is whatever, right? And so when Daenerys snaps and just like burns everything down, I think another reason why people are upset, even if it's been like sort of projected, even if you can see that, is that what we get out of it is the Targaryen father was crazy and evil, the Targaryen brother was crazy and evil, and Daenerys was crazy and evil. Yay, Targaryens, I guess. Like, what do we get out of that? Why do we even know these people? There's nothing redeeming, right? There's like no redeeming character. So who do you root for? You even said that Daenerys probably had the most interesting arc. Well, what does that say about everybody else? Like, what do we care about the Starks? What do we care about the the Lannisters? So like, who gives a shit? Like that.
Well, the Lannisters were fun because they were so bitchy to each other. Actually, honestly, the first 5 seasons were tolerable because of the Lannisters. And then when Tywin died, it's like Tyrion no longer has somebody to sort of spar with, so it became less fun.
Yeah, but I mean, can you have a whole show of Tyrion being a snarky asshole? Like, can you really do that for 8 seasons and keep people engaged?
Well, they try.
Like, we need more, man. Like, I'm sorry.
No, definitely.
I can't get into that show. That's like, I'm sorry. I can't.
Mean, having analyzed it extensively for a long time, I think that the appeal of the show is like the people who are arguing me would say. It's about losers who really are sort of psychopathic, getting into a negative spiral.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like it's failure porn almost. And
seems that way.
Yeah, and that's fine if you like that. I'm still trying to contend with how to judge that kind of writing, because it definitely has its own standards. And one day I will figure out the particular standards it needs to be judged by. But because I know that what I talk about in terms of writing craft is not really applied to it. The other thing is that I think there's, judging from House of Dragons, there's a lot of focus on creating these kind of emotional set pieces. And there's not as much focus on making them connect, making them have a logical progression, even in terms of the characters. So there's not a sense that the characters are very consistent. Everything just leads up to these emotional moments. And the setting is sort of sacrifice for that. Characterization is sacrifice for that. So if you can just change the character radically just to make the emotional moment more impactful, you'll do it. So it's like rule of cool except rule of drama. I think TV Tropes has and rule of drama really taken to an extreme that everything is sacrificed for it: characterization, setting, etc., continuity, lore, which it's fine. It's I don't know how to judge that. I guess the way that you judge it is how well it evokes these emotions it's trying to hit. But for me, the feelings of alienation over what you have to distort to be able to manufacture these emotion or these moments of high emotion, it maybe obscuring whether or not they're hitting the notes that they want. Like I'm basically trying to figure out a framework to understand how this is appreciated, a framework to say, okay, this is well done. If you're going for disconnected dramatic moments, this is well done. This is not well done. I'm trying to find a standard. It's difficult.
I understand.
It's such a very different form of writing.
Yeah.
It's unique. I don't want to say it's unique. It's it's not unique anymore because I see a lot of other properties are approaching writing in this way. It reminds me of a way of describing how to write stories. Whereas and the way that you do it, or a process, is that you get these index cards and you think about really powerful emotional moments. So things that bring a lot of feeling to the audience. So they might be the moment that the hero confronts the villain and he's being beaten down, but he gets up one last time and he figures out some trick that gives him that little extra edge to overcome the villain, or it could be some massive confrontation. One of the ones that are in this particular framework that seems to be very appreciated is this kind of, oh, I'm smashing the patriarchy and I'm learning that I'm everything I never needed to be just as a woman. I don't need to be anything but female. I have everything I need. That kind of cathartic moment seems to be popular today. And to sort of understand, okay, so you would make these index cards based on the kind of emotional moments you want to hit, your emotional points, right? And then you would construct a story around it. And it almost feels like we want to hit these emotional moments, but we don't have the stage of constructing a story to make the emotional moments make sense. Does that, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You can't just have emotional moments. Like, you have to communicate something that, I mean, if you want it to be successful, it has to be something that we all as humans can relate to. Not just like some people. Like, can't be too niche, because that's the problem with today's entertainment. Is it's all like, oh, but don't you want to hear about my story? My story of like discovering like, well, I don't know, like how hard it is to be a woman or whatever. It's like, no, actually I don't. I prefer something that's a little like that. We can all like say, oh yeah, I've experienced this. I felt this. Because I don't know if emotional moments are enough if people haven't experienced those emotions or haven't thought about what it might be like to experience something, like losing a child or something.
I think what you're balking at is actually this focus on experience rather than achievement. Because again, a lot of these emotional moments, for me, they're not like, especially in what I'm noticing in House of Dragons, they have these emotional beats, but they're not built up well. In my opinion, they're not earned, and I think that's what you're sort of focusing on, that, and a lot that's missing is the emotional beat of triumph over self, right? That's completely gone. But let's finish this off because we got a few minutes left, and I don't want to.
When speaking of the tragic hero, Aristotle states, "It follows plainly, in the first place, that the change of fortune presented must not be the spectacle of a virtuous man brought from prosperity to adversity, for this moves neither pity nor fear. It merely shocks us."
Okay,
the show's portrayal of Daenerys.
I just want to point out that I think she's trying to use people's upset over Arya Stark to strengthen her argument that Daenerys should have been shown as a tragic hero. But again, I don't think she's got the flaw right. It's not Daenerys' naivete; it's her self-righteousness. That's
again, they could have written her as a tragic hero, but they would have had to have thought more carefully about all of the other shocking stuff they wanted to put in the show.
Yes.
Like, that's the thing. Like, you got to take into account, like, if you want whatever was in there, but whatever it is, if you want us to feel as though there is an arc or that there's a tragic figure, or whatever, you can't, you got to set it up, but that means that you need to have a universalized framework that that we all understand, that when Jon Snow didn't get to kill the what is he called, the White King or whatever, when he didn't get to kill that guy and she did it, like, we knew that was wrong, like there was something wrong with that, or like the viewers, that's why they were upset. And yeah, you might say, well, that you didn't write the story, but it doesn't matter. It's like what we expect. Like there is such a thing as a story that people want to see, and they have an emotional connection to. They want to see it resolved in a certain way. And if you don't project it in or have some kind of foreshadowing, you're just going to shock people, and then they're going to feel as though you only did it to shock people and not because you thought that it made a lot of sense. And that will make people feel a little bit robbed, because they'll be like, well, that doesn't, that's not what I wanted. If you wanted Arya Stark to be the one to kill the whatever Night King, then I mean, obviously she did it, but I mean, if you wanted it to pay off better, then there would have been some other things you could have done to set it up. I don't know what, but because I wouldn't watch the show, but I figured that's what it is. It's like you just can't pretend like the substrate of story in the broadest, most symbolic sense is not something that people are looking for. Like they're looking for that, and if they get it, even if they don't know that's what they're asking for, even if they think that they want something like new, that you can bring them something satisfying in a new way. Plenty of options, but I don't think that I think that's what it is. Like, Daenerys is dissatisfying because they didn't set it up correctly, because I think most people didn't see it that way, and part of it probably did have to do with the fact that she seemed to be a tragic figure in the beginning. She was under the care of her brother or whatever, who wasn't really cool with her, and then she was basically like given to Khal Drogo, and from there it just looks like, oh, she's being victimized. But I think a lot of people don't see it deeper than that, because they're just shown what they see. So if you wanted to do this better, you just have to set it up better.
Yeah, but again, she can't just invent another freaking tragic flaw for Daenerys and say, no, it's actually this. No, it's pretty clearly self-righteousness. And this inclination towards seeing group guilt. Like, why do you think she punished an entire city for the death of her friend, and also for defying her, right?
Yeah.
It's just that is the way. And honestly, I know this is awful, but maybe this ties into like culture and saying that women like villains. It's not that I necessarily like Daenerys or I admire her as a character, but I appreciate the fact that she's so proactive. Like, I know that sounds horrible, but when it's really difficult, like the worst kinds of characters to get people interested in are the ones who don't do anything. Who, even villains are more fun, and that's one of the reasons why villains often have a more appeal than heroes. And that's, I think, to men or women, is because villains do stuff. They take initiative. They make plans. They are interesting to find. They have goals. Heroes are just like, yeah, we got to oppose the villain. The villain actually has a goal and a motive and interesting things going on. And that's, I think, why people like villains. So that's one of the reasons why I actually like Dany as a villain. She's and you can get away with that with villains. You can make them really proactive. You can make them, really forceful in their goals in a way that you just can't do with heroes. And it's not about aspiring to be a villain. It's just like she was talking about catharsis, or she's talking about just living out an aspect of a part of being human that you really can't indulge in, right? It's not like, oh yeah, I admire this person. No, outside of their proactiveness, but that's, like I said, I like Dany as a villain. That doesn't mean I thought that she was somebody to aspire to or a role model.
No, maybe you didn't, but a lot of women did. I think that's why they're upset about how it went.
Yeah, because they didn't notice. I mean,
yeah, I know, but they didn't want to notice.
Yeah, you didn't like, ladies. If you're upset about Daenerys turning to the dark side, it was there from the beginning. Like, if you were noticing it, the problem is that you have this lens that you're not seeing her morality.
I mean, remember, like, women were like mothers were naming their children after this character.
Oh, good Lord. That's
like that.
Actually sort of
it's true.
Hilarious.
It's true. So, but look, I got a super chat from Albernator Retro for $2 Canadian. He says Chuck Norris should have killed the Night King. I mean, I would have found a more entertaining bit of subversion, that's for sure. But should we finish this off, or do you want to move to the next? Do you want to move on to the other?
I just wanted to give you a heads up. Like, when you do your rant, you don't change to your face.
Sometimes I forget. I have to do it manually. So.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay, gotcha. All right, let's keep going then.
All right.
His demise is the abrupt change from prosperity to adversity. The seeds of ambition to the point of madness were never planted early on, so this was never her tragic flaw.
Yes, they were.
In a very short period of time, the showrunners
wait, ambition to the point of madness? No, self-righteousness and collective guilt-taking, guilt-blaming. Yes, yeah. She was engaging in collective punishment, like 100%, and she was self-righteous. Like she based on even that one bit of dialogue, it starts to frame the whole situation as she's latching onto a cause in order to virtue signal. In other words, that all is an aspect of narcissism, right? Like, narcissists often latch onto causes to virtue signal. And it could have been exactly the same thing that happened with Daenerys. So, I think she just has the fatal flaw wrong. And you can't change that. Like, does Daenerys' fatal flaw being naivete consistent with her taking a bunch of people to the dragon pit to execute them, allowing her dragon to flambe, dismember one of them, and the guy's blood is literally splattering on the other ones, and then she's like waving the dragon to come get the next one. Then she stops him and says, "Oh wait, I'm not gonna kill you today." Like, that is torture, friends. That is like flat out torture. And then we find out that obviously these men can't be that bad because she's willing to marry one, right? Yeah. So and again, she's brought these men in because apparently one of them is responsible for, or they could be part of the insurrection against her. I believe that was the reason. I mean, it's a lot of material to remember, sort of, folks. But it was collective guilt. She's executing people based on collective guilt. That ain't fatal flaw naivete, lady. That ain't it. You're barking up the wrong tree there. Okay, let's keep going.
Daenerys' flaw, from the naive quest to free the oppressed to a psychotic, unyielding thirst for power. Daenerys never enters Astapor or Meereen for the sake of power alone. She enters them to gain the love and trust of the people she frees. Her goal is to undo archaic systems of oppression, and this complements her tragic flaw. The moment she enters Westeros, she benevolently gives up her quest and armies to help Jon fight the White Walkers, but all the while the showrunners also attempt to portray her as a cold, power-hungry tyrant. Here, her actions and quest are not consistent with the flaw the show has been building towards. She loses her loved ones, characters...
Like, 100%, you're wrong about the flaw. It doesn't matter that her cause, you think her cause was just. She wasn't engaging in it because of justice. She was engaging in it because she wanted to be seen as a savior, because she's probably a narcissist. Okay? It doesn't matter how just her cause is. She could be saving the freaking orcas. She was still doing it to be worshipped. And when she came to a point where she wasn't going to get what she wanted, she engaged in more collective punishment. She literally, apparently, does not see people as people, but just people who will adore her versus people who will defy her. Okay? I mean, like I said, this seems consistent to me. Again, it would have been nice to have really worked a bit more on the craft, hammered home a lot of the key scenes necessary to to clarify all of this. But in the broad strokes, I see what they're getting at. And again, I really doubt, and I'm pretty sure Martin has said that he did talk to them about how he wanted his story to end. So I don't think that when they had that conversation and there was no source material to adapt, that they just went completely on their own. And in my mind, they inferred from stuff that was being written about Daenerys before they ran out of material. If that was the case, if they weren't giving direction by, like, again, beginning, he doesn't have the source material to end it, and they don't have the discussion of how is it going to end if you don't finish it. Like, I don't think so. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
With little to no development, Viserion, Jorah, Rhaegal, and Missandei, not because of her choices, but because the plot needed her to lose them. Her change of fortune is not built upon over time, does not give us a clear and consistent path to see how she arrived here, and therefore, when Dany lays waste to King's Landing after the city surrenders, we can no longer empathize with her because there has been no consistent route that has driven her to this point. Therefore, we do not experience catharsis as we watch Dany meet her demise.
Wait. There's been no consistent what that brought her to this point?
Let me go back.
That has driven her to this point. Therefore, over time, does not give us a clear and consistent path to see how she arrived here.
Oh,
and
yes,
therefore, when Dany lays waste to King's Landing,
let me put it this way. They did not give a clear and consistent path for somebody who can't connect the dots. Yeah, when I'm watching this, I'm like, yes, they need to clarify things. But in broad strokes, it was there. It was there definitely from Meereen. You just chose not to see it because you thought that it's justified to behave in this way to a group of people based on nothing more than what status they were born into. Right? You thought that was justified, so you didn't see it. You thought it was okay. You thought it was okay for Daenerys to execute people by dragon. Right? You thought that was okay based on the fact that they might be potential conspirators. Right? You thought that was okay because, they're rich. Eat the rich, right? Okay, well,
yeah.
They brought it all to its final conclusion, and we found out the true nature of someone who will do that. And I don't think this individual liked that. And now she's inventing a new tragic flaw for Daenerys, which, again, was never really, like, naivete is not a tragic flaw, first of all. Also, it's really hard to compare to Greek because we have a different narrative focus now, or we in the West. I mean, Greek is more archaic, so we have more of a focus on these kinds of moral character arcs. Like the example is, of course, the story of Christ, the Passion of the Christ. But this idea of temptation, of flaws, in other words, things that you either have the potential to harm others or you are harming others, and confronting that. And it's just, this is not, you can't compare a modern tragedy and a modern Byronic hero or a tragic hero with a Greek tragic hero. It doesn't, like, it's like the storytelling values are more archaic. Okay, let's finish this off. We're almost done.
All right.
We can no longer empathize with her because there has been no consistent route that has driven her to this point. Therefore, we do not experience catharsis.
Why would you want to empathize with her?
Demise. Daenerys could have been a tragic hero.
Yeah, but she, okay, all right. How are you going to demonstrate that she has overcome her naivete? Oh, I guess what she's going to say is that she's going to, I don't know, flambe the Red Keep and Kirsty and then get executed by the people of King's Landing, which I guess would make the people of King's Landing the villain rather than Daenerys. But that isn't her. That's ultimately not Daenerys' responsible. First of all, it just completely ignores the shit that happened in Marina, which you can't ignore in Daenerys' characterization. But also it essentially just means that Daenerys is a victim. It's not that she has a flaw that's hurting others. It's that her flaw only hurts herself. Like, in the end, that's not even catharsis. First of all, how would you demonstrate that she realizes it's her naivete? I mean, the thing about Macbeth is they realize it's his, that's the one that's like post, that's not archaic. So he realizes it's his ambition that's causing the downfall and the destruction of everything, right? So he has that moment of catharsis, sure. How are you going to have a moment of catharsis about my naivete? I was just too good for this sinful earth, and that's why I'm dying. Like, what? Like, even allowing for her premise that naivete even is a tragic flaw outside of archaic, like Greek stories, where the locus of control is not put on the individual. Like that's the big difference. Like, yeah, you can have a Greek tragedy because the gods just hated you. And it's totally outside that. We don't like those though anymore. We don't tend to write those. We like the locus of control to be on the individual. We want the tragic. And first of all, when did Macbeth become a hero? Like, actually, come to think of it, what the hell? Why the hell is she presenting Macbeth as a hero? But anyway, we want the tragic flaw to be a result of decisions the individual makes, not just random shit that happens because the gods got upset with you or you accidentally had sex with your mom. Right? That's where we want it now. Where is the locus of control with Daenerys? How is it centered on her that she can have a cathartic moment when she realizes that she's the problem? Naivete isn't realizing that you're the problem. Naivete is having an ideal that is incompatible with the shitty world of Westeros. That's even within her context. She's not. This is not creating what she thinks she's creating. All right, let's keep going.
All right.
Of Hollywood, she is instead a proverbial evil villain. This is the tragedy of Game of Thrones. In the end, Weiss and Benioff proved George R.R. Martin right.
Oh, okay, it's over. There's no sound.
All right.
It just suddenly cuts off.
Okay, great. So they proved George R.R. Martin right, which is that adaptations are shit, except there was nothing to adapt. So honestly, guys, at this point, Game of Thrones wasn't written by Martin. It was written by these guys. Like, I mean, you're probably never going to get an ending by Martin. So the real critical part, the part where everything you're writing is leading up to, which is the ending. I mean, the beginning is really important because if you don't stick the beginning, nobody's going to read it. But the ending is what makes the story. Well, I hate to tell you, but Game of Thrones wasn't written by Martin. In fact, Game of Thrones was apparently, if he does finish it, it's going to be adapted by Martin from the show. Like, I'm sorry, like he's abandoned it. Where was the adaptation coming from? Like, there was no runway. There was no further runway. Unless they had like a long conversation. And even then it's not an adaptation, it's the execution. They didn't adapt Martin's end. They maybe at best executed his suggestions, and at worst, at worst they executed his suggestion, or at worst they just invented it all by themselves. So they either executed his will, or this was just completely novel, but there was no adaptation. And if Martin was so worried about his work being adapted, he should have finished it at least. Like, oh man. Okay. So that was that. I do have a thank you. And I also wanted to ask if we could play one of our animations as a filler when we go to the next part.
I don't know if I'd have to have that set up in advance, and I don't.
All right. So I want to thank the Great Indoors for sponsoring this show, and he has supported us to the tune of $250. So thank you, Great Indoors.
Thank you, Great Indoors.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
I actually appreciate the change of pace and the change of focus. Like, this is a little bit easier to talk about, and it's also something that I It's a topic that I appreciate because I'm a writer, and I like my particular hobby horse is how men and women are depicted in fiction. Not from a feminist lens, of course, but from basically a non-feminist lens, and which doesn't justify my non-feminist lens basically applies accountability and reason equally to male and female characters. That's why it's non-feminist, because it's about equal obligations and responsibilities, not just equal rights. All right. So if you enjoyed the show, actually, before we get into that, I'm going to tell you guys, go to my channel, my personal channel. It's, I believe, at Gender Attic on YouTube. And we are going to continue this discussion. We're going to get into more House of the Dragon, and keep going on it. And hopefully that'll be fun. So consider going there and watching us there. But it's going to, at least the horizontal part of this video is going to be moving to a different location. So at Gender Attic, please go there and watch us there. And once again, if you want to send us a comment at any time, or even after the show is done, you want to comment on anything that we talked about, you want to correct me on something, you want to say you appreciate this content, you understand where I'm coming from, I am, once again, really trying hard to understand and appreciate the appeal of the kind of writing that Martin has been engaging in with Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. If you want to send us a comment, tell us we're not screaming into the void, feedthebadger.com/justthetip. You want to explain to me the appeal, feedthebadger.com/justthetip. I will read whatever you send, and we will read it out on the next show that where it's reasonably on topic. And if you want to support the show, you can do so at feedthebadger.com/support. Make sure we can continue to do this content because you are the reason why we're able to do that. And it's always appreciated when people get their support in earlier rather than later, because, you know, I am a very nervous person, and Brian probably is. He's probably, I don't think he's a nervous person, but maybe he doesn't like dealing with nervous people, so it helps him too. So once again, feedthebadger.com/support. And back to you, Brian, for
right. So we're going to be going over to Just Allison's channel for a little bit. I'm going to hit the standby, so you'll see stream starting while I switch over. So go to Allison's other video. This will continue over there. So if you guys like this video, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, hit the bell for notifications, leave us a comment, let us know what you guys think about what we talked about on the show today, and please share this video because sharing is caring. Thank you so much for coming on today's episode of Red Chill Cinema, and we'll talk to you all in the next one.